at the University of Delaware. I'm a professor at the University of Delaware, and I am a professor in biological sciences. I've been here about 20 years, and have been the director of our graduate program for the past 10. I have an active research lab. My research studies the pathophysiology of both age-related and congenital cataracts, as well as cataract surgical side effects. So what I'd like to do is give you some things to think about as you're approaching dealing with lab staff and students that you may be interacting with in the future. And if anything, I want you to have one take-home message, is that when you're mentoring people who you may have working for you in the future, that it's very likely that they're not going to be like you. They're not going to have your same aspirations or interests. And that can be okay as long as they can meet certain standards of professionalism. But if you don't take into account that these folks have different goals in life, it can lead to a lot of conflict and make the relationship bad on both sides. So that this group is a mixture of, I think, one very senior faculty member as well as a bunch of people. It sounds like a lot of you are on the cusp of moving from your training position to your first independent position. So, as you're thinking about being in a position where you can actually supervise people, that some of the first decisions you need to make is, what type of person do you want to have be working under you? And what are the strengths and the advantages and disadvantages of different flavors of lab staff? And I'm, again, not going to address clinical research fellows here. So the first thing that a lot of newly independent researchers think about is that, oh, they want to have a postdoc. And a lot of the reason that this is a big focus is that many newly independent lab staff are coming out of postdoctoral training themselves. They know how much productivity they contributed to their mentor's laboratory, and they want that person who can really help them with their productivity themselves. And often, if you could recruit the ideal postdoc, they'll be trained in your research positions, that they're bright and they're going to be driving day-to-day research agenda. You're not going to have to mentor them a lot in scientific writing. They could also come up with innovative ideas, and again, they're part of this, and their ideas, when they're in training with you, are going to help make you famous. And they can develop their own funding, so they may not kill the bottom line of the laboratory. However, for early career independent faculty members, postdocs can have more disadvantages than advantages. And some of this is that it's really difficult to hire the ideal postdoc that was like you. One is that, the most motivated postdocs, they're going to be looking for people who have strong mentoring track records. They're going to be looking for people who have very strong reputations and everything that can help you with. And the folks that a lot of early stage scientists end up with is people who are unmotivated, who may not have the kind of skills that you would ideally want. And they can take significant time investments to mentor because of this, because they didn't receive some of the training that you would have wanted them to receive earlier in their earlier in their scientific careers. Also, such postdocs are often very transient. They may only stay for a very short period of time. And some of this is that they are taking the postdoc as, oh, I can't get a job right now. I'll do this for a few months until I find the job that I want. And since postdocs can be reasonably pricey lab staff, what sometimes can happen is that new investigators can put significant resources into hiring a postdoc, but don't get the ideal benefits of a good postdoc. And if anybody has questions, feel free to interrupt me or wants to discuss any of these sorts of things. Now, for that reason, a lot of early career investigators run their laboratory on technicians. And technicians have some significant advantages in that that if you're hiring the right technician, they may be already trained in your research procedures. There's less expectation for mentoring or working on their career development. That you also aren't expected to really mentor them so much on scientific thinking. And if you can keep them continuously funded, they can provide you some serious continuity that trainees who are in the lab for a few months or a few years and out cannot. However, that technicians can also have some significant disadvantages. They may not be willing or able to drive projects forward. Similarly, they may not be able to do scientific writing or contribute much to that intellectual development. Technicians are always going to be a cost to your research, and that also often technicians will stay as short-term employees. Again, technicians are often reasonably poorly paid compared to work that people can get into the private sector, and you don't have them long enough to really have them make an impact on your scientific career. Now, from the standpoint of, I believe that at this point, none of the people that, or at least some of the people that are here, they're not in a position or aren't hooked up to graduate programs where they can work with graduate students. But it's something that if that is accessible to you, they can be very, very helpful in your scientific career. And particularly because late career graduate students can really drive that day-to-day research agenda. They can do scientific writing with support. They can come up with innovative ideas, and they can develop their own funding. However, graduate students also have disadvantages, that they are trainees. They need to spend significant time on non-research activities. They can waste reagents due to inexperience. And they really do need a large time commitment for mentoring because often they have little understanding of professional behavior, and they also sometimes don't have an understanding of expectations for career success in science. But no matter who you end up with lab staff, whether it is a technician, a graduate student, or a postdoc, you will have an expectation of mentoring of some sort or another. And when you're trying to make a decision about how to balance your research group, you also need to think about how are you going to be assessed scientifically. Are you going to be assessed as both a trainer and on your research productivity, or just on your research productivity? For instance, in my environment, if a faculty member would come in and only ran their lab on technicians, that would be considered a big negative because our faculty are brought in and they're expected to function as trainers. Also, simply working with technicians, that you don't sometimes have access to that passion and creativity that a young scientist can give you. But you also have to consider, do you have time to really mentor a young scientist and all the things that they need mentoring to? And finally, is this what you want to be spending your time on? There are different personalities, and there are some people that the best job satisfaction comes from mentoring or training others and seeing what they can do in the future. Does this give you satisfaction? So when you're trying to balance what you're going to be hiring in your lab, all of these things are considerations, of course, as well as money and what types of staff you have access to. All right, so these are just some questions that I want you to be thinking about. The things that, so no matter whether it's a technician or a postdoc, you still need to think about the same sorts of things that you would if they were any other employee. That you want your people working for you to have professional skills and knowledge. They're just not going to be effective otherwise. That you want to give constructive feedback. So you want to, if you don't like the way they're doing either the experiment or communicating with you or any other aspect of their day-to-day interactions, you want to provide insights into those behaviors that will derail their advancement. And the very best employees are able to take constructive criticism if they know that it's constructive. And very often it is the way you give such criticism that is really important. You also want to give such constructive criticism in such a way to increase their motivation. It doesn't help to say, you need to be doing this better, you stupid person. That you really need to be giving criticism in such a way to make it clear that they're a valued person and that make them want to put a lot of effort in from their own heart. And that's something that really is dependent on the supervision, because even the most motivated person can become demoralized if they have a supervisor who doesn't appreciate their effort, who does not reinforce their positive behaviors. It's also important to just instill an understanding of scientific culture. Things such as how does the publication system work? How do you deal with paper reviews for a paper? How does one decide whether a scientific paper is high quality or not? And that's very often things that you think people should know really need to be explained, very, very precisely, because there's only so much people can pick up the culture within the culture. There's also, you really need to be thinking about how to build self-confidence and self-awareness so that people realize how they're being perceived by others, and also having somebody have the confidence to be able to take evidence and decide what to do next. If somebody is constantly being belittled, they're not going to have the confidence to become an independent scientist. And then finally, to really improve communication and interpersonal skills. These can go from everything very simple to most research labs have group meetings. And when somebody is presenting their research in front of the group, challenge them, help them understand effective slides, effective communication skills, have them think about not just communicating their work within the lab group, within the lab group's jargon, but how to communicate the same research in a more public environment. So basically with all of these things, the role is similar to a parent in that, yes, you have to be careful not to get too deep into somebody's personal life, but again, you're parenting them to become a better scientist. And I apologize if this is coming out. It's going to become a lecture. That I would again much rather have this be a conversation, but I'm not really sure how to do that. All right. But some things that if you read the literature on mentoring in science, you almost will get the impression that bad mentoring is more common than good mentoring. And some of the things that I see on a regular basis is things that essentially are expecting output from a mentee or output from a staff member without considering what is in it for them. And some of the issues are not building professional development time into experimental plans. Something that we see a lot with graduate students is that a mentor is constantly pushing the graduate students to do the next experiment, is constantly pushing them to get the next piece of data, but doesn't give them the time they need to read the literature or to really write a good proposal for entrance into candidacy, or time to go to a conference to learn about a new a new area of where they may want to go into their life, or to go to a career planning workshop, that in the best scenario, your lab staff are in a contract with you where their job is to work really hard and make you famous. Your job is to help them to the next level of their profession. And in that best case scenario, that's going to be a handshake. And by not building time for your lab staff to undergo professional development activities, such as coming to workshops like this, is that it doesn't allow them to explore all of the possible things that they could be doing with their career. Another really big problem I see is ignoring the mentee's needs. This can include not giving feedback on paper drafts. That I have seen advisors not read, actually this even happened to me when I was a young scientist, that the mentee would write the first draft of the paper and it would go months or even years without the advisor reading the draft and critiquing it. That yes, that as a lab director, you are busy, but that extra paper may not help your career, but that could make or break the mentee's career. So by not giving feedback and not allowing students to move their work forward this way, you are almost malpractice in the sense of really not understanding that if you take on a staff member or a postdoc or a student, you're responsible for their professional development and you have to prioritize it. This can include changing projects on a whim and not providing guidance on finishing a project within a reasonable graduation timeline. Again, you're thinking about, people who do this think about the science from their own perspective, but they're not thinking about it from the perspective of what are the needs of the mentee that they have taken responsibility for. And I think in some ways that bad mentors are not taking responsibility for their commitment. They're only looking at it as, oh, if I get a grad student or a postdoc or a technician, I can get my work done. They're not looking at it as the other side of that responsibility. Another really big one is yelling or belittling effort. And it's even worse when that's done in front of other students and staff. Even if you've never worked for a yeller, I think we all know scientists who, when they're frustrated, will yell at their students or technicians or staff. And it's absolutely not acceptable. There are people who can take working for somebody who yells a lot, but it absolutely is not a productive way to get the best efforts out of your staff. Doing it in front of other students and staff is even worse, because then you're publicly humiliating somebody, and the behavior can go to the point of actual bullying. And there can be a fine line sometimes between constructive criticism and bullying, but bullying absolutely occurs in science. And then finally it's something that is less of a problem now, but traditionally, many scientists felt that if the mentee chooses not to follow in their footsteps, is not aspiring to an academic research career, that mentee is setting themselves up to be a failure. And so to really think about that, you need to accept that there are many things that your mentee may want to do, and that there is more than one honorable career path for a mentee. Now I'll stop right now. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about or questions or anything here? Should I just go on? Okay. So assuming that that you're going into this with the expectation that you're going to be an excellent mentor. So you're going to do all these things right. You're going to give people professional development activities. You're going to give them time to develop their profession. You're going to be a person who really cares about the success of your students. And that can develop into a very good relationship with your mentees, but it can also be extraordinarily frustrating because they are probably not like you. Now, the example that I like to give is that if people who are mentoring biomedical PhDs, that statistics show that fewer than 10% of biomedical PhDs will ever hold an independent research position in the academy, i.e. a faculty level job of any sort. And the fact that you're in a position to be taking on students and postdocs is already has really meant that your career path is already quite extraordinary compared to what most of the mentees that you're going to have access to, or most of the lab staff who will ever work with you. This means that they have different views on how things work. So from the standpoint of research jobs, and I think some of these things are also true for medical students and residents, is that there are definitely more graduates out on the market than academic job openings. Even if every single person wanted an academic job, there just are more people who have the credentials than our jobs. There are also many people who are just not interested in making the same sacrifices you've made to get where you are. This can include money. For instance, if somebody is a technician, it's very possible they do not want a PhD. They do not want those sacrifices in money, time, and personal life. It's just not worth it to them to get through a PhD program, that they are actually quite happy in their roles as technical staff. There are folks who the reductionist nature of science is just very unappealing, that they like science, they're very interested in it, but they're not interested in understanding this very small detail of a big problem. And most of what we do in the sense of research is that we're taking an enormous problem and we're breaking it down and answering a small aspect of it. There are folks who just do not find this very interesting. They're also interested in receiving more tangible results, and this can be money. For instance, people who decide to get master's or bachelor's degrees and go into the workforce instead of going on to PhDs or medical degrees, it's delayed gratification. And if you're not interested in delayed gratification, they're not interested in following your career path. Or they're interested in more direct impacts on the world. I think that many of you are working on things that could be directly translatable, because this is a translation. This is a mechanism where we're really trying to get people to translate their science to the clinic as fast as possible. But there are folks who are going to get a lot more emotional satisfaction in maybe seeing patients, or in my field, working at a drug company and working on a drug that's actually going to be used in a patient soon instead of the basic science. But if you're not interested in, again, delaying gratification, it's just not going to be appealing. And it's just also that, to be honest, not all graduates are of equal ability, and this can include a whole host of abilities. And intelligence isn't the only one. Things such as time management or the ability to handle stress are equally important. You can see two people of equal ability, of equal intelligence, but one is way more productive because of better time management skills. Something that we had a very talented graduate from our program who had many of the skills necessary to be a highly successful research scientist, but he suffered from anxiety, and stress triggered it, and he picked a job that would be a very, very low stress job because he didn't want to live under the constant stress of getting results. And to really, when you have somebody working for you, to try to understand really what they want out of life. because it doesn't really help to be mentoring them towards career paths that they're not interested in or that they maybe are not well suited for. So when you're taking on lab staff, that I really recommend to people is that you want to set up the win-win situation. And I think one of the first responsibilities is to find out what the mentee wants in life. And if they don't know, if they say, I'm interested in science or I'm interested in medicine, is to help them find it. From the standpoint of biomedical scientists, there's a great online tool called myidp.science. It's called myidp.sciencecareers.org. That is basically a professional development plan website that asks a great deal of questions about people's abilities and interests and tries to match that to a whole host of scientific careers. Now, some things that you have to understand about this is that sometimes it can be difficult to have people do these surveys, and they may or may not want to tell you the results. That in the world, there are many horror stories that are told student to student about unsupportive advisors, that when the advisor hears, oh, I want to teach at a small college, or I want to go to industry, or I don't want some sort of academic career, the advisor pulls all interest, support, and mentoring. So some of this is trying to win your mentee's trust so that they're willing to tell you really what they want. Now, part of this is that if you're going to have a long-term experience with somebody, is to understand what they want in life can change, particularly for a graduate student. There are a lot of studies that say that what a first-year graduate student wants out of their graduate student experience and what a fifth-year graduate student wants in relationship to final career goals can change a lot. So this is a case in the time that you're working with the student or trainee is to really get a feel for how this could be changing in a fluid way. The other part of this is educating yourself on what that mentee needs to achieve those goals. What education do they actually need? What experiences do they need? What professional development activities do you need? That very often the job has a basic credential. That could be an MD, that could be a PhD, it could be a master's degree. But what gets them the entry-level job are other types of experiences. For instance, one of my PhD students, who was a very, very productive research scientist, wanted to go into scientific writing. She got her PhD, which was the basic credential for her job. But what actually got her job was that she was doing part-time scientific writing while she was completing her dissertation, so that she had the education and experience to get her first job. And another thing that you really have to think about is balance your needs for them to be productive with their needs for an advancement. So when I was a postdoc at the NIH, there was always this joke is that it was possible to go to research seminars every single waking hour of a normal work week, because we were in one of the largest biomedical research facilities in the world, and that you could have just gone from seminar to seminar to seminar. That's not very productive. On the other hand, though, if you just spend all of your time in the research lab and you don't talk to what the neighboring labs are doing or what labs are doing across NIH, you never got new ideas, you never had opportunities for collaboration and so forth. So this is making sure you achieve that healthy balance so that they get the professional development activities they need while still being productive. But in the end, you know, something that I tell my graduate students is that part of the reason you're working on this project is you're making me famous. You know, just admit it, that as the person running the laboratory, much of the glory for the accomplishments are going to come back to you as the laboratory director. However, students do not resent that as long as they feel that they're getting what they have contracted to get, which is the skills and resume fodder to be successful on the job market and to be successful professionally, no matter what that is. Sometimes explicitly expressing these things, explicitly expressing that this is a two-way street, means that the student isn't constantly expecting just to take from you, but then also that they're understanding how they're making good contribution. So in the end, being a good research mentor is really the same things as leadership skills overall. That I have taken a couple courses in institutional leadership. And one of the things that really comes out to me is that leadership skills, mentoring skills, and parenting skills are very, very similar, and they overlap a lot. First of all, mentors are very, very important to the student. And often the mentor is more important to the student than the student is to the mentor, because the mentor might have 10 students. The student only has one mentor. And what that means is that offhand comments can be very, very hurtful. Even just like throwing off a negative comment that you don't even remember doing it, but to the person who you're mentoring, it becomes a very, very important thing that they will nurse and really feel resentful of it. Similarly, the lack of explicit feedback to the mentee allows them to interpret what you mean positively or negatively at will. Something that I see in my job as a graduate program director, where I see the aftermath of the lack of explicit feedback, is where the mentor is very, very frustrated about maybe attendance in the lab, what experiments are being done, how the student is communicating with them. But if you actually explore it, you realize that the mentor has never made their expectations very, very clear. They've always assumed that the mentee would just know. And very often the mentee doesn't know. And just alluding to a problem often doesn't work, because a lot of people are not able to be self-reflective enough to basically take a negative allusion. The other thing, though, is that it's very, very easy to run into the trap where all of your feedback to somebody is negative. You need to write this better. Your figures are messy. That you haven't done this, you haven't done that. This could be done better. Where's this control? However, if there's only negative comments without positive reinforcement, it becomes counterproductive. It becomes that person is just, tearing me down again, and it can really kill somebody's self-esteem. That there's research in the leadership literature that suggests to try to frame criticism in a ratio of 5 positive comments to 1 negative comment. And if that ratio becomes more negative than that, it starts to become counterproductive. Similarly, when it comes to being too negative to your mentees, is that best performance is really elicited when appreciation for effort is shown. If somebody's really working hard but still having problems or not getting it, show an appreciation for the effort can make the person willing to try even harder. Belittling the effort just makes the person discouraged. So it's working the psychology of that situation, is making sure that that if somebody does something really, really great or useful, using the word thank you can be a really, really powerful tool when it comes to motivating your lab staff. Now, from the standpoint of skills and mentoring, I want to now, you can do all of these things right. You can have great leadership skills. You can be the very, very best mentor in the world. However, you can still run into roadblocks. Now, some of these roadblocks are made worse actually, most of these roadblocks are made worse if you aren't the most effective mentor, but everybody will experience these. One big roadblock is mental health issues in trainees, students, and staff. There are studies that at UC Berkeley, 45% of graduate students have reported episodes of major anxiety or depression while in graduate school. It's an extremely high percentage of mental health issues. It's something that I definitely see here. Now, some of this has to do with when students are in school, is also the age of onset of many major mental health issues. But it's also, graduate students particularly are in a very vulnerable place, that all of their effort that they put into that spot can go for naught if the degree is not completed. And especially if if you're mentoring a student and they're being yelled at, they're being belittled, they're not receiving appropriate feedback, that can definitely reinforce anxiety and depression. You can also run into issues where students have poor time management skills. One of my former doctoral students could not understand the idea of you come into work, you set up an automated procedure, and then you work on things that were not automated. He wasn't good at balancing the technology with his experimental plan, which meant that he just couldn't manage to efficiently get experiments done. You can also definitely run into immaturity, just folks who don't focus very, very well, and personal and life issues. Many graduate students, this is the time where they're building their personal lives, and long-term boyfriends and girlfriends, they have breakups, they have deaths of parents, they have all sorts of issues that can really derail their life, and that these are things that you have to be prepared for when you take on staff. Now, many of these things can be dealt with successfully by caring and supportive mentors, and also knowing when to refer for mental health sorts of things. I have to say that I find myself referring students for mental health things maybe about once a month in my role as a graduate program director. And this can really make the difference for a student to be successful or not. Now, one thing that I want to address too is this idea that it's school and not a real job. This can be a problem for anybody who is a trainee, and it's taking their role as a trainee with the same seriousness that they would be taking their final professional position. Now, where am I? Oh, this is sorry, I just skipped a couple slides ahead. This is a essay that was written by one of my master's students. And he basically, I asked him to really talk about what the transition to his internship in a company was like. And he wrote to me and he says, well, this means I need to get to bed and wake up early, eat right, and keep other things in my life to achieve balance while working. This is a guy who had always sort of struggled with meeting professional objectives in school. But he got his first job in a company and he suddenly realized, oh, I actually have to come to work on time. Oh, I actually have to follow through on things. It just, for him, school was something that you just sort of do very, very slowly. And you don't have to take it that seriously or be punctual or have professional behavior. And this can be one of the most difficult things about dealing with a trainee, is that if you have a postdoc or a student who is not considering this their real job, getting their best effort out of them can be very, very difficult. So I just want to talk about a couple case studies in mental health. A very common one is somebody who was productive up to a certain point who just stops coming to work or coming to work for a whole day. They lose their forward progress and they start avoiding and canceling meetings with you or avoiding and canceling group meetings. Now, these are major issues in relationship to their ability to be productive, and that they can come from very unexpected sources. Some of it is actually perfectionism, and this is that they feel that everything needs to be so perfect. They get so anxious about failing at being perfect that they then stop being able to accomplish anything. This is something that I have seen in many, many students over the years. And to basically get them to to get the anxiety under control and get them to understand that it's great to want it to be good, but sometimes perfectionism is counterproductive. There can be no clear path to finishing or just total hopelessness. This can happen with mid-career graduate students. It can also really happen with postdoctoral fellows who have been in school their whole life, and that making that jump from a training position to a permanent professional position, they can't see that path forward. And in those situations, really addressing and making a plan to go forward can really help these things. And then, of course, personal difficulties, things such as breakups, money issues, and so forth. And another one that people don't consider is that many high-achieving people, and these are the folks who are scientists, they don't know how to deal with being average or failing at something. These were always the smartest kids in school from first grade through high school through college. They then get to graduate school or their training positions, and they're no longer the smartest kid in class. They're average because they're in class with all of the other smartest kids in class. And this can be a very, very difficult thing for people to deal with. And so making that transition to being among a true peer group that has similar abilities to you, that can be a very, very difficult transition. And similarly, they also may find being ignorant or not knowing something to be embarrassing because they were always the kid who put their hand up in class right away. They answered the question faster than everybody else. But they're now in an environment where that they are not going to know things. And sometimes people will avoid the issue instead of actually admitting that they don't understand and getting the help that they need. This crosses very much into imposter syndrome. That imposter syndrome is where you have a high ability student or person, and very often these people have very strong analytical skills. Where this really becomes an issue is that they tend to compare themselves with the most successful people in their group, not the group overall. And so they lose perspective. They question whether they belong here. Are other people better than me? They feel that they have fooled people to get into this position. Folks suffering from imposter syndrome can almost become paralyzed with high levels of anxiety because they're so stressed out that their supposed lack of ability will be discovered, when objectively people around them know that they are very high ability people. Since they don't believe it themselves, they're very, very anxious about it. Now, imposter syndrome tends to be more common in non-traditional background students. However, everybody can be affected because just because somebody's from a traditional background, you don't actually know how much their abilities were reinforced and how confident they are in their own abilities going forward. All right, so now I'm going to kind of end this on, so I've sort of spoken about things that you will encounter as a mentor if you do this long enough, and every single one of these things I have definitely seen in students, either my own or students who are in the program that I administer. Many of these things can be directly addressed by either excellent mentoring or sending people for outside help and support, including mental health counseling. Now, However, that you also have to realize that, yes, you have responsibilities as a mentor, that you cannot fix every employee or student or postdoc. You can, and sometimes by letting a situation go on for too long, you actually start jeopardizing your own career, because you do need your staff to be productive so that your resources are effectively used to move science forward. So you also have to think about when to pull the plug on this relationship. That some very clear indications are they don't show up for meetings with you on time after you've made it really, really clear what the expectations are. Very often, people don't actually understand how to behave professionally and need to be taught. But after enough, by making it clear and explicit, not everybody can actually get it together to act professionally. They still don't communicate effectively even after mentoring. And overall, the issue is not acting professionally after attempts to teach professional behavior. Also, lack of productivity can lead to reagent waste. In my field, we do a lot of cell cultures. We do a lot of living experiments. If somebody starts an experiment and never analyzes the data or lets the experimental system die, it's wasting huge quantities of reagents without any path forward. And in the end, you really have to decide, does it take more of your time than can possibly be worth it in regard to this person's future productivity and your self-satisfaction as being a mentor? Now, pulling the plug can be very, very difficult. Personally, in my career, I've only ever done it twice in 20 years. And in both cases, it was an extremely painful experience, and actually for me as a mentor as well. And however, in both those cases, my only regret in the end was I didn't do it sooner. So it's coming up with a really happy balance between giving people the chances that they need and knowing when to end the relationship. So as you decide to terminate a mentoring relationship, the thing that I can't emphasize enough is documentation. You want to document every instance of poor performance with dates. You should document your attempts to address any issues. You should provide written backup of any oral warnings that you have given about lack of improvement. Also, if you're working with techs and postdocs, you really should be in close contact with your human resources department for the correct procedures at your institution. And if you're working with students, you need to be in contact with graduate program directors early and often. If you're working with undergraduates, you need to be in close contact with whoever is in charge of the undergraduate program that they're working with you with. But again, it's all about documentation to make sure that you are doing things with the right procedures. So that in some ways I'm kind of sad to, actually in many ways I'm sad to end this on a negative note, because watching the success of your students over the years can be, I think, the most satisfying part of one's job as a scientist. That seeing the master's student who worked in my lab 15 years ago be a very, very successful public health officer is really satisfying to me. To watch just one of my former PhD students started his own company, and it was really, I was as proud as him as I probably would be if one of my children did such a thing. That said, it can be a minefield to walk through, figuring out how to motivate people, how to understand their needs, and to fulfill their needs as best as possible. And even in regard to pulling the plug, sometimes the best thing you can do for somebody is to pull the plug, because then sometimes that's what it takes to get through their head professional expectations, which gives them a chance to start cleanly and go to a new environment. So I think that's all I'm going to say as a talk, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you too, but that's all I have to say today. So anybody has any kind of questions or things that situations they'd like to talk about, I'd be happy to.
Zubair and Jake, I just want to let you know Melinda is also the one who will be teaching our grantsmanship class. So if you have any questions about that or anyone has any questions, Melinda is an excellent resource. So please go ahead and ask them while we have her.
The other thing is that if you have any questions you just want to kind of talk about offline, or we can set up a time to talk on the phone about something that is a situation that you don't know how to handle. I tend to do that a lot with faculty. You just have situations with their lab staff that they just want some advice on how to handle it going forward.
Okay, I just want to say thank you. It was really, really very informative. I am mentoring people for some time, but a lot of things I learned today is really going to help for me in future. Thank you again.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, so
final call
else?
For questions.
Okay. And also, Erin has some, what are they called, articles that I tend to collect articles on these topics, and I think it's 4 or 5 of them that I have downloaded from various resources over the years that she can send you for some further reading on these topics.
All right, well, Melinda, thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions or wants to have the handouts right now, just let me know. Other than that, thank you, guys.
Bye-bye, guys.